We are now finishing up the July of 1940 turn. We're moving to the January 1941 turn. This is where all the income lies. So Russia's got quite a bit. Germany. The United States is moving up. Japan. Great Britain. So a few things happened this turn. First of all, starting I guess with the Japanese because they're closest. They're pretty much taken China over. China, other countries have kind of stopped their Lend-Lease program as much as they were doing, and China is now falling back into the mountains. Communist China lost their home province, but they had enough money to buy a mountain troop, which they did, and now they're just gonna, I guess, try to hold on to their one territory. That is mostly full of planes in Nanking. It's actually right here. There is an infantry and a militia there. When the Vichy fell, there was a territory in North Carolina that went to the Vichy, and that became Japanese according to the rules. So Japan put a militia on it, defend their new acquired territory. Australia is moving over to try to help out Africa, and Far East Command is doing the same. They're building some troops. There's some ships on the escorts, and they're moving their stuff over to try to take back part of Italy or part of Africa. The Italians have kind of spread out there. However, the big news is the Italians attacked the Suez, but the British survived with one swordfish left, one tactical bomber remaining. That fleet right there is still pretty formidable. It's right there. 2 battleships, 2 cruisers, 3 destroyers, a little coastal sub. So that fleet there is pretty formidable. Britain's got a fleet on the other side, kind of facing off, not quite as tough. But the British do have this fleet, which is much larger. It's represented over there. And that fleet has, that fleet right there has actual room or maneuverability to get down and join up with that other fleet. And they pulled out of North Africa because the Germans kind of attacked back with a couple, and they wiped out some infantry, but there was still 1 infantry remaining, and he withdrew back to London. The airborne troops are ready to launch if they want to, but as of right now they're not going to. Germany's trying to shore up their conquest of France, and Russia came in, attacked, Germany counterattacked, and Russia then counterattacked that. But Germany does have Romania on their side now, so this could be a long battle. And right now, Germany has 3 tanks and 2 mech. Or Russia does, pardon me, that they built in Kursk area, I guess, or Kursk. And so, falling back into kind of defensive lines, and they're bringing troops back over from the east that were in these areas. Germany does not have a fleet anymore. It was wiped out. Russia, knowing this, built a transport so they can potentially threaten the whole coastline of Germany. So Germany's got to watch out for that. The United States can now move their fleet, which they did, to Hawaii. And so that fleet right there is that fleet right there. 3 battleships, a couple cruisers. There's a carrier back there, but there's nothing on it. The United States did build a fighter and a tactical bomber, and they did send China the Flying Tigers, since China needs the assistance. So the United States is starting to maneuver and come over here to make life more problematic for Japan. So now we're starting January 1941. And that's what the money looks like. Japan's probably going to have to make a move at some point against the United States, because if they don't, they are going to be out of. The United States is going to out purchase them, and India already has quite a bit. So Japan's got to get a little more aggressive, I think, now that they got China kind of sewed up. So we'll be back with the end report of the January of 1941 turn. And here we are at the end of the first part of 1941. Americans keep gaining on everybody. Germany's still ahead, and Germany's recovering. So we'll start with Germany. Germany has pretty much taken back the portions of France that the British had landed on. Republic of Spain, they did take out the infantry, but they lost their infantry in the process. Republic of Spain built a medium tank, so they've got a bit of a counter-attacking force here. The Germans are just kind of, I guess, building a few units here and there on this side, on the I guess the western side of Europe. The eastern side of Europe, oh, by the way, I don't know if I told you this, but Germany does have heavy tanks, so they've got the ability to build Tiger tanks, and they've been building them one a turn. These two armies here are right here, and they're pretty large. They're mostly mechanized with tanks, so there can be some blitzing action. I don't know if it's enough blitzing for them to push into the Soviet defensive forces in Oral, Kursk. But they could go after Kiev, I guess. Take some territories over here. Russia is still, they moved their two factories from Smolensk and from Kiev back into the Urals, and they destroyed their two air bases, not knowing if the Germans will be taking them over, those territories. And they're building a huge counterattacking force with mech and tanks, medium tanks. The Russians still haven't been able to get to heavy tanks. They're one step away. So Communist China got lucky. They rolled a 1, so they got 1 infantry. Could have taken 2 militia and infantry. They took an infantry. Japan, I don't know what Japan's planning, but it looks like they're probably set for a potential Pearl Harbor. That fleet with the surprise move is actually in range of the American fleet. I'm going to put a couple blockers out. They've got another smaller fleet there, and I'll show you these two fleets so you can see what they're composed of. Those two markers are these two markers. So one fleet has a small carrier, battleship, and a destroyer, and the other fleet has 2 carriers, 2 battleships, a few cruisers, some destroyers. The American fleet, which is this fleet right here on the Pacific side, is right there. And the Americans were contemplating pulling back some of the fleet, but they decided, you know what, the Japanese want to go for it, use their surprise attack. They can, I guess, trying to make them use it and get America into the war. America also has bolstered up defenses all over the islands, putting a militia on each one of them. The Netherlands is spread out a little bit to try to stop Japan from potentially doing. And Australia has got a medium bomber so they can potentially counterattack. Far East Command has been sending stuff over to Africa, which I'll show you in a moment. Nationalist China took back one province, and they're building mountain troops, and they have their fighters, so they've got some defense in Yunnan. Africa, The Italians made one last ditch effort to take Cairo. The British actually bolstered that with a medium tank and an infantry, and the Italians were hoping that they would get a couple surprise attack rolls so they could take it, and they failed, and then they didn't roll very well with their planes. They ended up losing all their ground troops in the second assault of Al Alamein, we'll call it, and they flew their planes back to Rome, I guess figuring that they're probably going to have to start building up their forces there, because Britain came down with their fleet from the English Channel, and there's the British fleet. So the British probably have a bit of an advantage on the Italians, because that was the English fleet. Here's the Italian fleet. So they have a bit of an advantage, but it'll still be probably a close fight. But England is not too worried about it, because the Germans don't have a fleet at all. The Germans made a few mistakes. So that's where we are at the end of the first half of 1941. Now we move the second half of 1941. And that's how long the game lasts. So that's how many turns the Allies and the Communists have to defeat or at least push back the Axis. Italy looks like they're in trouble right now. Old Man Sarge back again. We've got the United States has entered the war. Japan attacked in the second half of 1941. It was a bloody fight. The United States did win. They have a carrier left. They moved a fighter from San Francisco to it. They finished their big battleship, which is on par with the Yamamoto. And they built an elite Marine and two regular Marines. Japan launched that attack, and that gave them an ability to get a light carrier for free. And then on the tract, they get one light carrier on a 3 and one light carrier on a 6. So on the stage 2 and stage 3 of completion. China pushed back a little bit, and the Brits helped them. Actually, I think this is supposed to be it's not supposed to be there. So the British helped them. They took the territory right outside of it. And then the Japanese pushed one more territory right next to Nanking. The Philippines did fall, but the two battleships that were there were hurt, and so the British came in, the Far East Command, and they attacked it. And basically they are forming a big ring around the Japanese. That little fleet right there, it's not very big. It is right there. It's a light carrier, a cruiser, and a destroyer. The Japanese are trying to make a push down in the the East Indies, and they also landed on a territory down here on an Australian territory. They took over the two territories that were in French Indochina. So Hanoi and Saigon fell to the Japanese. And that's really all that happened on this side. Germany continues to build up on this front. They pushed a little bit in the south. The Russians are just destroying all their facilities as the Germans move closer. So air bases are gone. They moved back their industrial complexes, miners. And naval base down in the Crimea was destroyed because they failed their attack. They did push back a little bit. But Germany, those two armies are right there. They got two King Tigers, or pardon me, not King Tigers. They got two Tiger tanks, and then they have another stack of 7 infantry and another one. So Germany is trying to push into Russia. They have stabilized the France for the most part. Republic of Spain threw their tank into the southern portion of France, and the attack succeeded, but they lost their tank in the process. The Americans, on their turn, started moving some of their supplies over, so a light tank and an infantry, and they're going to get ready for D-Day, because the Italians pretty much have been kicked out of Africa. They failed their attack on Cairo. They tried twice, they failed it, and so Cairo, just with some help from the FEC, Far East Command, who brought over a tank and an infantry, there wasn't much left after they failed, and so the Brits basically just pushed out, and then they attacked with the fleet that they had gathered there and wiped out the Italian fleet. So Italy is pretty much just stuck with Italy proper, and they have sent up a mechanized infantry and a couple aircraft to try to help the Germans push on Russia. So they're going to try to be holding on to this. France, they finished their industrial complex last turn, and they built a light or a medium tank. So they have got a medium tank that they're going to try to help out, I guess, with the Normandy push, or maybe the Italian push. That's where we are right now. Germany is the only one with any technology. They have heavy tanks. Everybody else keeps failing. So now we will move on to January of 1942. Tank destroyers can be built, and there's a few other pieces that can be built now. One of them, I think, is the LVT or LTVs or LVTs, the marine landing craft. They can be built now as well. So a lot of different builds are being opened up. So we'll return at the end of this turn. January of 1942. We are essentially at the end of that turn. We will be moving on to July of 42. And this is how it looks as of right now. So as far as the money goes, everybody's doing fine, but excuse me. America has just taken the Marshall Islands. Elite Marines, another Marine, and an Army infantry, a couple fighters, and a battleship. They repaired their battleship that was hurt in Pearl Harbor. It's ready to go. The carrier came over from the west coast to help out against Japan, but I don't really know if they need to. Japan's not doing so hot. China is just kind of walking around taking territories back. Japan's trying to go out. They did take Burma, but Far East Command just took it back with a couple tanks and mechanized, which was lost in the combat. They're poised to potentially take Malaya. They do have a Yamato battleship out, but it is damaged. Got one hit on it. The Allies are just they're just throwing everything they can at the Japanese, trying to blunt them until the Americans come over. Japanese are down quite a bit. They're going to have to go full defensive. It's just the beginning of 42, and it's already turned around against the Japanese. Coming over here to the Russians and the Germans are just kind of standing off. They're doing some little nitpick battles up in the Baltic region and down in southern port. Italy did take eastern Ukraine with a couple help from a couple aircraft. So they're trying to push and try to surround Kiev. So Kiev is surrounded and it is out of supply at the moment. But Germany's got a bigger problem. The British are building a force for landing, and so are the Americans coming over. So I don't know. Germany's probably going to go full defensive now. The United States is going to start sending troops over. Italy is essentially gone. That destroyer is actually supposed to be dead. So Italy's been kicked out of out of Africa completely now. And Britain and France are poised to strike at the European continent from the other direction. So it's been a bad game, I think, overall for the Axis this time. So we'll have to try some different strategies next time. Everything I tried didn't really work out the way I would have hoped. I'm thinking maybe you have to hit stuff with overwhelming force and just hit one territory, you know, at a time, because spreading yourself out didn't seem to work too well for the Germans this time. Trying to take too much at one time. So anyway, we are going to be moving on to the July turn of 42. The one good thing about what Germans have is they do have heavy tanks, and they've got them all sitting in this army right now. They've got 3 built so far, and they've got 1 more in the backside. But they're probably going to have to switch gears and build tank destroyers, because the Americans are bringing over quite a few tanks on this front, and the Russians have a number of tanks on this front. So yeah, January or July of 42. So there's just that many turns left before the end of the game. 7. We'll be back with the next turns report. Here we are at the end of July 1942. There are 6 turns remaining. And we're moving on to January of 43 now. And the Axis is just falling completely apart. The Allies just did a massive number of attacks all over the board. The Australians, the British, what was left of the Dutch, and they just kept hitting Japanese fleets until there was no Japanese fleets yet left. And the United States even got into the action and attacked a fleet up here, killed a couple destroyers, took over Iwo Jima, threatening the homeland of Japan even. China is just taking all of China back. The Australians and the Far East Command are essentially taking Southeast Asia. The Japanese made an attempt to take Malaya, but by the time the battle was over, there nobody had any troops left. So Malaya remains in Far East Command control. So yeah, not looking too good for anybody right now. So because the Allies are doing so well, Britain decided to do an invasion on the southern boot of Italy, and they've got aid of the French. They moved in a medium tank and an infantry as well. The Italians are just starting to beef up Rome, moving a bunch of stuff down there. I guess they're going to probably just turtle it out. And the Allies, America and Britain, invaded Normandy. So that's the force right there. It's not enormously huge yet, but the Americans keep sending over like 2 infantry and 2 tanks, and the Brits, of course, can send a ton of stuff over. The British fleet is right there. It's not enormously strong, but it's got three transports. So they got a beachhead, and Germany doesn't have enough to push back. And Germany had started the Atlantic Wall. They're probably going to stop because it's no good anymore. They've got to push the Allies out of France. But then the Russians, on the other hand, are building enormous forces up against the German front. The Germans built some defenses, some barbed wire, and that army is actually pretty large. It's got a lot of mechanized in it, and heavy tanks, 4 of them. Germany's the only one with the heavy tank technology. In fact, no one has actually got any technology in this game except for Germany's heavy tanks. America's trying. They keep investing every turn because it's worth a victory point if they can get certain ones, but everyone's pretty much stopped except for Russia keeps trying for heavy tanks every turn. So, I don't know. I think that this is going to, obviously it's going to be an Ally victory, Ally common turn victory, but who's going to have the most victory points when it's all over with, we'll have to see. Yeah, Japan just fell apart, and the rolls weren't good, so I'll admit that. In fact, one of the craziest rolls I ever saw was down here. The Yamamoto attacked a destroyer, I think it was off of Sumatra, and a transport, and the destroyer defeated him. That's how bad the Japanese were rolling. Battleship got blown up by a destroyer. How embarrassing for the Empire, or Japanese Empire. So that's how the game looks right now. We're moving on to January of 43. Can the Allies completely defeat the Axis in 6 turns? We'll see.